Hello and welcome to BlockOne Productions. My name is Soma and I am with Glitch the Husky. While I was writing the first episode of the beginner series, I decided to embark on a personal project. A recreation of one of my favorite synths, the iconic and influential Prophet 5 from Sequential. And many people ask me about the patch and a tutorial. You can download the patch from the link in the description. Let's build it from scratch. I based my version of the synth on the Pro 53. The version from Native Instruments, and I used these diagrams to conceptualize it and build it. But the really interesting part is in the PDF manual, where it gives more details about the signal pathway. First, we need two PCOs. I decided to use oscillators from Bogue Audio, because they have square, saw and triangle outputs. You can change the frequency, fine-tune them, they have PW, FM and sync inputs. And more importantly, because I have a switch to turn them into LFOs. This will be essential for the oscillator B pathway. The Prophet 5 also has noise source, so let's use noise from VCV and now let's connect them to a mixer. I will be using switch 8.1 from Bogue Audio, because it has on-off switches, so we can have either both or none of the outputs. Oscillator A has a square and saw output, and oscillator B has a square, saw and triangle outputs. Let's connect them both, as well as the white noise output to Matrix 8.1, another type of mixer from Bogue Audio with signal attenuator. Let's put Matrix 81 into unipolar mode so it acts more like a mixer. In our diagram, this output goes to filter. The Prophet 5 has low pass and high pass, as well as cutoff, resonance and keyboard amount. So I decided to use Stabile from Volt. It even has bandpass and SEM outputs, so they can come in handy. So select either high or low pass. Maybe you can add a switch so you can change them with a button, but for now let's send it to a VCA. This VCA will be controlled by an envelope generator, and then it will go to another VCA. I decided to use ADSR from VCV because they are polyphonic, easy to use, and more importantly, because they have a retrigger function and CV inputs for each step. This will be very useful later when we patch the vintage knob. Let's use two ADSR modules and connect one to the VCA and the other one to the cutoff in Stabile. It will get a lot more complex later, but for now let's leave it like that. That's basically all of the signal path. Now we need something to control our notes. I decided to add a clock from JW modules because it's simple and small. MIDI to CV from VCV, as well as MIDI Map also from VCV, if you want to map any parameter to a MIDI controller. They are simple, get the work done, and they are already included in VCV Rack. Let's select our desired polyphony, but remember that Prophet had a 5-note maximum, and select Reset as our polyphonic mode. But what if you want to use a sequencer to play the Prophet? Let's add a section for that. First, we will add Manual from Bogue Audio, a simple button, and then let's add two switches, also from Bogue Audio, and let's patch our BOCT, clock source, gate and velocity. You can connect the other input from the switch to the same parameters of your desired sequencer. And now you can change it by pressing the button from Manual. The Prophet has a glide button, so let's use PolyGlider for models. Because it's polyphonic, has CV ins for everything. I love that in modules. And I also use CV knob to control glide, rise and fall at the same time. Let's attenuate a little bit the signal, and now the output will go to our VCOs. I will add Sum 8 from ML modules because we will be summing other signals into our VCOs. I recommend the Mark 1 version because it's simpler, and we won't be needing the other functions from Mark 2 or 3 versions, but that's up to you. Some output will go to VOCT from our VCOs, and in the case of the oscillator B, we will be using another switch. This is called the keyboard tracking function or KBD in the Pro 53, and it is simply to select if the note played will be affecting the frequency of our oscillator B. In previous version of this project I used UMix, which is really similar to this module, and it's also polyphonic, but some can take monophonic inputs and add them multiple times to each channel of a polyphonic signal. It is really an important distinction. Back to our diagram, we will be working with the wheel mode now. We will be using an LFO from Vogue Audio, again because it has everything we need and more. For this, we just need our three outputs, square, saw and triangle. Let's send them to another switch 8.1 and to a VCA to select our initial amount of LFO modulation, and then to a crossfade mixer. I used XFADE from Vogue Audio. Our signal A will be our LFO and our signal B will be pink noise from the noise module. This signal goes to another VCA, and this will be modulated by the mod wheel output from our MIDI to CV module. And finally, let's connect it to a switch 1.8. Remember that this one is the opposite from switch 8.1. 1.8 has one input that can be routed to up to 8 different outputs, and 8.1 has 8 inputs that can be routed to one output. We will be using 5 outputs. Frequency from our oscillator A and B, pulse width for both oscillators, and it also go to the filter. So let's add another sum module before our filter. Now let's work on one of the most important parts of the Prophet, the polymod or polyphonic modulation. It takes 2 inputs from the filter envelope and the oscillator B, each one with an attenuator, and the output can be routed to the frequency and pulse width of the oscillator A and or the filter envelope. So let's take another matrix 8.1 and connect our 2 inputs, and then the output goes to another switch 1.8 and connect it to our Vout, pulse width and filter. In this case, I noticed that results from the envelope were a little bit too much, so I added an attenuator in between, so we can have some more control over here. Back to our filter, we just need to connect the envelope to inv by Vogue Audio to invert the envelope. Pass that signal through an attenuator and then sum. So this filter has 5 inputs from the envelope, from the wheel mode, poly mode, the keyboard tracking amount, and one from our vintage analog section. We will talk about that in a minute. The Prophet 5 has a sync button, so let's add it from our oscillator B output to a switch, and then to the sync input on our oscillator A. We are almost done. I added this section to select whether we want velocity from our MIDI controller or from a constant source. So I use SlimFixedVoltageSource from RndC to add a 10 volt signal to switch. The other input will come from our MIDI controller, and then it will go to another sum module to prepare it for our vintage section, and finally to a VCA. In my case, I like to have a little bit of compression, so I routed the main output to comp by Squinklabs, a really nice and simple polyphonic compressor. and that output goes to Mix 8 by NIST. I like this mixer because it has a lot of useful functions and CV inputs, but it also has another light compression and limiter. It's all personal preference, but I love this mixer. There is another output that goes from comp to this sum module by VCV. This is a different sum. In this case, it takes a poly input and gives a mono output. This output will go to Millenial by Hora, a nice simple delay, and the output will go to the 6th input in our mixer. This is because by default, any polyphonic signal in channel 1 gets divided into individual channels, and I like the possibility of treating each channel independently. I also added a retrigger button. Simply add a switch and connect retrigger from MIDI to CV to the retrigger inputs of our ADSR modules. The analog vintage section is quite interesting and I am really proud of it. To start, we have RndC by DocB. It can create multiple semi-random signals, and you can select the frequency, the seed, whether they are bipolar or unipolar, and of course the number of signals created. So I selected a low frequency and 8 outputs. And first they go to an attenuator. Then they go to a VCA, so we can select the amount of vintage character. And then the signal gets split into 2 categories, general and V-oct modulation. General outputs simply get connected to our ADSR modules, velocity VCA, to the filter, and the V-oct signals get attenuated even more, because otherwise they will get intense results on our pitch, and this way it is a lot more musical. That's it. We now have a fully functional Prophet 5 inside a PCB rack. You can add some aesthetic touches, like labels using TD202 by Submarine or whatever text module you want. I used custom blanks to add these wooden panels and added some blanks to fill the spaces. Now let's test it. If you want to see it in action, you can watch my last video and the link to download it will be in the description. This is version 3 of my Prophet recreation. Version 4 will probably be some slight adjustments in attenuation levels. Maybe I will add a filter to the delay, or maybe even reroute the delay to turn it into a crossfader dry-wet knob like in the Prophet. What are your thoughts on a possible B4? If you followed this tutorial or created anything using it, please tag me on Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, or show it to me on Discord. I would love to see your creations. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Follow me on social networks, join my Discord, and stay tuned for part 2 of my beginner series.